barca está en el puerto, esperando mi partida. Un adiós a mi querida, tan solo me resta dar. Ten piedad, mi linda rosa, aunque yo de ti me ausento. No me olvides mi tormento, no me vayas a olvidar. Adiós, 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 mi querida, adiós. Adiós, 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 mi querida, adiós. That's a song from old California, from 200 years ago, from the old days of Alta California. Long before the Yankees ever got here, back when it was only Californios and Kumeyaay native people living here on this land where we are right now. And this is a story from those days, from 200 years ago, about a couple named Francisco and Ana, and they longed to have a child, they couldn't have a child. How many stories start like that? So many stories. It's usually the good guys. Usually you feel for them. They're usually good people. You know, the parents of Rapunzel were like that. Even Abraham and Sarah started off like that in the Bible. But these people, they weren't quite as good as Abraham and Sarah. They were a little more ambiguous. You see, they could have had a child because there were plenty of orphans here in the town of San Diego de Alcalá. There were plenty of orphans they could have adopted. Lots of kids who needed a family, but they didn't want one of those kids. Those children, they were in the care of the mission. They didn't want one of those children because those kids, they'd had a rough life. They'd grown up as orphans. A lot of them had lost their parents to disease and horrible things that happened. And you know, they were complex, and they didn't want one of those kids that had issues that had been kind of spoiled by the world. They wanted a kid who was fresh and new. And also there's an additional reason I say they're not that great people is because they wanted a kid who looked like them, who looked Spanish. And a lot of those orphans, they were Kumeyaay native people. And so what did they do to get the kid? Well, they went to the witch. So they went after Mass one Sunday. A lot of people, you go to Mass first and then you go to the witch after that if Mass didn't give you what you're looking for. So they went to Mass in the old church of San Diego de Alcalá that you can all still go visit up on the hilltop. And then from there they walked east into what we now know as Mission Gorge. They walked east where they knew that the witch lived. And they headed out, they walked across the potreros and pastures. It was drizzling, a lot like these past couple days. Finally they got out to the big, tall, towering mountain that the Kumeyaay called Huaypai, the captain, the chief, that huge mountain. And right at the base of that mountain there was this rocky out-jutting, and underneath in the shadows of that cliff they saw that little cabin. And they walked up kind of slow to that cabin, almost wondering maybe they shouldn't have come after all. They get up, there's a strange light coming from inside the cabin. Didn't look quite like a normal firelight. They got up to the door, and Francisco, he was just about to go knock on the door. He just got 2 knocks out of that door, and then that door just creaked open on its own. Imagine a creaking noise. It creaked open on its own, and they heard a voice from inside that cabin. She said, "Come on in. I've been waiting for you." And they walked in, and that bonfire, there's a bonfire right in the floor, right in the middle of the cabin. And that bonfire, it's blazing, and there's that hunched old woman right by the fire. She said, "Francisco, Don Francisco, Doña Ana, I knew you were coming. I saw you in the smoke of my bonfire. Please take a seat." So they sat down. They told her about not being able to have a child. She told them, well, there's plenty of orphans out there. They said, yeah, the father, the priest, he tells us that. Everybody tells us that. But we want a child who's untouched by the world, who's nice and pure and spotless. We want a child who's fresh and new. She said, well, I think I can help you. So they gave her 1 gold coin. Francisco, he promised her 10 more if she could do something for them. She said, let me conjure up the forces of darkness. And so she put some animals' bones on that fire. She put some herbs on the fire. Then put some pine resin to smoke up. And then she put a grinning puma skull right on top of all of that. And she took out her molcajete and she ground up some animal bones and herbs and strange things. She started chanting, kind of rocking, chanting in some strange language. And that smoke rose up, and then the fire turned scarlet red, and the whole room smelled like sulfur. And then the witch, her eyes glazed over, and she started speaking in two voices at the same time. She spoke in a high woman's falsetto voice, and at the same time she spoke in the low, grave baritone of a man, and those two voices came out of her at the same time. And the witch, she said, "Ooh, you will see a path. Go down that path. At the end of the path there is a pine thicket. Look for the pine stump that was struck by lightning where the deer graze. There's a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, waiting for his new family." She said, "You better hurry, that baby's waiting for you." So Francisco, he gave her the other 10 pieces of gold, and they headed out into the rain that was now falling. And they hiked across those pastures where the cattle were grazing. They hiked and hiked. Don Francisco, he knew where that path was. He'd been hunting for deer up there before. So they followed that path up the hill to the pine grove, and right in the middle of it, there was that stump that had been struck by lightning. And there, sitting on that stump, there was that little baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. And it was crying, a nice, healthy cry. Well, Anna, her eyes lit up. She went, she picked it up. She held it. Oh, it's beautiful. Look at his little rosy cheeks. He's perfect. He's got such a nice, healthy cry. We have a child, Francisco, we have a child. So they walked home in the rain just as happy as they could be. But as they were walking along, Anna, she was having trouble carrying that child. It seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. She said, "I must just be exhausted from the trip all the way out to the mountain Waipai." She gave the child to Francisco, and he carried it. After a while, even he was having trouble. It was getting heavy for him to carry. They got home, and they laid the child on their bed, and they unwrapped it again. And then they just stood back and gasped, because there was a child that must have been at least 4 years old. That kid had aged about 4 years in that time, and it was lying there. They could see it. The child had soiled himself, so they had to change him. So they got the diaper off, and as soon as they did, that soiled child stood up and just ran off with a little giggle and ran into the other room. Well, they went chasing after it. Then the child went from that room to the next room. It was running all over the house. They couldn't seem to track it down, couldn't seem to get their hands on that kid. And that kid was running back and forth throughout the house, giggling. And as it ran from one room to the next, they heard that giggle, and that voice was changing. As it ran, they heard it starting off as a high little mischievous giggle, and it just got lower and lower. And when the child finally came back out into the main room where the fire was blazing in the fireplace, there was a child, well, as tall as a child, with the old wrinkled face of a man of about 100 years old. And that old man's face smiled at them and had long, sharp teeth. And that old man-child ran to the front door and stood there. The front door slammed open. The wind blew it open. The flash of lightning outside. And in the flash of lightning, they saw that old man-child smiling at them with his hideous, distorted, wrinkled face, and his teeth were even longer and even sharper. And he pointed at them. He said, "Papa, Papa, I'll be back to visit you later on." And then that creature just ran off into the night to go do his impish, devilish delights in the world. Well, after that terrifying night, Doña Ana and Don Francisco, they decided maybe it wasn't such a terrible idea to adopt a human orphan after all. Might have a few issues, might need a little therapy, but at least they knew it would be a human being and not some terrifying devilish creature that the witch brought out of the underworld. Until then, they could only hope and pray that that devilish old man-child would wait a long time before he came back to visit them in their home in old San Diego de Alcalá. Ya la barca está en el puerto esperando mi partida. Un adiós de mi querida, tan solo me resta dar